We're sitting here on July the 10th, 2010, with Bill Ribich at his wonderful home on the shore of Lake Superior, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. What's the name of your hometown here, Bill?
Ironwood, Michigan. Little Girls Point at Ironwood, Michigan.
Little Girls Point. Is that where this house is, at Little Girls Point?
That's right. That's where we're situated.
Yeah. Now, where were you born, Bill?
I was born in Eveleth, Minnesota.
How do you spell that?
Eveleth, Minnesota.
And when was that?
February 3rd, 1925.
Okay, so you're 85?
That's right.
You're looking pretty good. You're looking like you're about maybe 60, 65. So just for a matter of record, my name is Ronnie Warner. Bill was, I guess, my dad's best buddy in the war, and I'm up here visiting Bill for the very first time. I think Bill came to our house when I was a kid, but I don't remember that. But it's been very nice to finally meet you, Bill. Which war did you serve in, Bill?
In World War II.
And which branch of service were you in?
I was in the engineers, and we served in the European Theater of Operation, later the Philippine Islands, and then in Japan, and from there, home, discharged home.
What was your final rank there?
T5, Corporal.
So that was a Tech 5?
Tech 5, yes.
Okay. And you said that you were in both theaters then. You were in the European campaign as well as the Pacific campaign.
That's right.
Let's step back a little bit in time and try to refresh your memory on some things. But before you were in the service, where did you go to school?
I graduated from Wakefield High School. And
what state was that in?
That's in Wakefield, Michigan, in 1943.
So how did you get from Minnesota to Michigan?
My dad was an iron ore miner and worked for a company named Pickens Mather, and he later transferred to Wakefield, Michigan, where they were also mining iron ore, but it was open pit mining.
And it was right here in Ironwood?
Right here, no, right in Wakefield.
In Wakefield.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's where your dad worked in that mine.
That's
then.
right.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. An older brother, Joe, and an older brother, Frank, and a younger brother, Leo. Joe and Leo also were in the service. As a matter of fact, my brother Joe was at the same camp as I was, in Camp Ellis.
Yeah.
Illinois.
Was he an engineer as well?
He was an engineer, 1322 engineers.
And your other brother was what?
He was in the artillery, and then later shipped to the Aleutian Islands near Alaska.
Let me ask you this: is it okay to link this video onto YouTube? If you know what that is, it's an open website on the internet for anybody that might want to access this video. Would it be okay that we do that?
Sure.
Is it okay if we send this to the World War II Museum in New Orleans?
That's fine.
Well, Bill, I really appreciate this. It means a lot to me. A few things I'd like to cover. As there are some things that I remember so well when I was a kid. I remember vividly the day, for instance, JFK was shot. I would think one of the endearing memories of your life was the day Pearl Harbor was bombed. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Where were you?
In Wakefield, Michigan, at that given time. a high school student, of course, then, yes. And it was shocking, actually. But as a youngster, say 15, 16 years old, it wasn't as shocking as it was to perhaps the adults. And until later, when you recognized what had really happened and began to think about what was going to happen to you as an individual if we went to war, that got us to thinking.
Were you in high school? Now it happened on a Sunday, right?
Yes.
Did you hear it that very day?
Yes, we heard at home.
Yeah.
Because we did have radios at home at that time.
And so you actually heard the announcement over the radio.
That's right.
Then. What was your parents' reaction to that? I guess shock as much as anything.
Yes, very, very shocking. And President Roosevelt's speech, a day of infamy, I remember him saying, and that. But yes, it was shocking to my parents as well.
Did anybody really expect that? I mean, did you sense that war was coming?
No.
So you thought that somehow we would. You knew that there was something going on. A big war was going on in Europe, but I guess was there a sense that somehow America was going to avoid that somehow? Or as a teenager, did it sink in much yet?
You know, as a teenager, the idea that you were living in the strongest country in the world, and eventually we would be able to solve that problem, and we would be able to do whatever was necessary to rid the Japanese from Hawaii, and if it came to war, there would be no problem. That was our feeling at the time.
Sort of that American can-do attitude.
That's right.
Well, so the announcement was made, and how much later then were you drafted or enlisted?
Yes. In 1943, in August, I had my examination, and in September I was drafted and sent to Fort Sheridan, Illinois. And later transferred from Fort Sheridan to Camp Grant, and then after a period of maybe 3 weeks or so, I was sent to Camp Ellis, Illinois.
So you enlisted or were drafted? Which
drafted.
You were drafted,
yes.
So you got a notice in the mail?
Yeah, I did.
Now there was a brief period of time before you were of age, I guess, when the war was going on, but you weren't old enough to be drafted, is that right?
That's right.
So what were you, you went on through high school and finished?
Went on to high school and finished, and then actually went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where the University of Michigan was, and worked in a place called King Sealy, where they made a number of parts for whatever, tanks or what have you. And that's where I worked for a short time, and then called back to be drafted.
So, did you have a choice? How did you end up in this branch of the service?
There was no choice.
So you were drafted and you were told that you were this.
That's
is that
it.
Right?
That's where you were going.
Okay. So, you got drafted. Tell me about your first few days of the service. I mean, where did you were told to report somewhere?
I still remember my first day at Fort Sheridan. I can still remember a fellow by the name of Corporal Barr, who had a very, very low voice, and early in the morning yelling to get up and what have you. I was always an early riser. I had no problem. But I still remember some of the people who were there with me had an awful time, regardless of who was calling, to get up.
Now, when was he getting you up? Very early, I take it.
Very early. I think I would expect it was about 6 o'clock in the morning.
Uh-huh. You were in barracks at that point?
Yes, we were in barracks.
Yeah. Now, was this what I would hear of as boot camp, or was this before boot camp?
Well, we never referred it to boot camp. Boot camp was always referred to the Navy. This was, I would say, early training. Waiting to be assigned to an outfit. That's where we were. A staging area.
Yeah. What did they have you doing then?
Oh, we did some marching, and that was it by and large. And listened to some of the information given to us regarding war and what to expect and that type of thing.
By that, were you sort of given lectures or talks by the officers?
Lectures by officers, and also lectures regarding health, regarding venereal disease, regarding purification of water and that type of thing.
I remember Dad talking about those venereal disease tapes. He said they scared him to death.
That's right.
Made him want to be celibate almost. Now, during that time, do you remember any of those instructors? During that time, or any of your other basic type training?
The names of those corporals in particular escaped me. But I can remember one corporal in particular during close order drills had us sing often as we marched. I remember, I think his name was Parker. His last name was Parker. That was at Fort Sheridan. Then later...
Do you remember any of the songs they had you sing? Were they silly little things, or?
Yeah, no, silly little things were like... and on the shelf, his father kept a rifle. He kept it in the springtime in the merry month of May. And when you asked him why he kept it for an engineer who was far, far away.
And all this time you were marching as you were singing this?
Yeah, we would sing those songs.
Yeah. And so you were sort of keeping in time with the music?
That's right.
With the song?
Yeah.
So after this training period, where did you go next?
We went to Camp Grant, which was also in Illinois. And Camp Grant, as I remember, was primarily an area where the medics were training, I think. But when I got there, a fellow from my hometown who lived just a matter of about a mile away from our house was the chief cook for headquarters there. And when he found out I was there, he got hold of me, and I used to go there to eat rather than to eat at the barracks, and I had excellent food then.
Sounds like you knew your way around. You knew how to work the system over.
Yeah. And his name was Leo Piktonen. I still remember that.
How would you spell that, you think?
Piktenen, a good Finlander name.
Quite a few of them up here.
Many,
Yippers,
yes. His sister graduated the year before I did.
From the same school?
From the same school.
Small world, huh?
Yeah.
Now, so that was at Camp where?
Camp Grant.
Okay. Was your next place Camp Ellis?
Yes. After a short time, I can't remember how long in particular, but then we were sent to Camp Ellis, we wondered why and what would happen when we went to Ellis. And there were rumors by some of the soldiers at Camp Grant that would say, don't ever get sent to Ellis,
Why was that?
because that was going to be an engineering outfit that you were going to be in. And
so
no
what
one
was
wanted to be in the engineers.
Why is that?
Because work, work, work.
No glory, all work and no glory, huh?
And as I told you before, like the old German prisoners said, Pionier nicht gut, alles arbeiten, which meant engineers are no good because all you do is work, work, work. And it was true.
Well, I guess my dad had enough German and whatever else in him. He was a pretty good worker. Now, is Camp Ellis where you met my dad, or was it later?
No, I did.
You didn't meet him there.
He, at that particular time, they were forming regiments, and people were coming in from all over. I think your dad came. I know your dad came from Camp Claiborne. Some came from Fort Lee. Some came from a number of places, and until they organized a company, you had people who had been in various camps, artillery camps, infantry camps, signal corps, or what have you, and then later drawn into what was called 1306 engineers.
It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the 1306 really came to be at Camp Ellis, is that right?
Yes.
I know that my dad, Ocie, was there, and he talked about some things that you had to do. First of all, he said the winter that year was, at least to a southern boy, was horrible. He said it was below zero, which he'd never encountered before, and he said it was just miserable to him. And he said they had you marching some 100-mile thing.
100-mile hike.
In the middle of the winter time, which he thought was inhumane.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that was a big thing, that the people who were in 1306 engineers, for the most part, the majority of them did complete that 100-mile hike.
Now, once you formed into companies, I think Dad said that you also had some sort of competitions.
We did.
That you had to do.
On maneuvers.
Was that there at Ellis as well?
Yes. Well, I think it was, at that given time, it was at Starved Rock or Murfreesboro, Illinois, and we were there on maneuvers, and that was our first bit of understanding of what Army life overseas or wherever we were going to go would be.
Did they actually have you build bridges and
yes, we
things
did.
like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where is that where you learned how to build a Bailey bridge?
That's where many of us were learning how to build bridges, as well as what else we might do as far as road construction was concerned, and what have you. Except for the specialists who knew how to teach the building of various bridges or what have you, we did primarily what we were ordered to do.
Yeah.
None of us, as I remember, young fellows like myself, had any engineering experience or building experience.
I'm assuming some of it soaked in over time, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Nothing like being tried by fire, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, from there, did you ship on out, or did you go somewhere else in the States?
No, from there, during that time, we went on maneuvers. We also learned what it would be like to be a part of a regiment that was going to be building bridges and what have you, and from there we were sent to Camp Shanks, New York. They're getting ready to board His Majesty's transport, the Esperance Bay, and being shipped there to England.
Tell me about that boat. Dad didn't like being on boats.
It was terrible. It was the messiest boat, and it smelled, and the meals were normally greasy fish with cabbage, mind you. It was awful.
Were these British rations you were fed?
That's what we ate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was the ship actually a British Navy
It was a
ship?
British ship, and the crew was primarily British. The gunners and the whole thing else this was manned by the British, and we were not accustomed to eating that type of food.
Well, what was the sort of interplay between you and the Brits on board?
Pretty good.
Camaraderie
Actually,
sort of
yes,
thing?
yeah, pretty good. The camaraderie was very, very good. I don't think any of us had an opportunity to get to the cooks because that could have been a problem. But nevertheless, they had to feed us what they had,
Yeah.
and we had to eat or not eat. When there was time, you could get something from a commissary, so to speak. And I know I did, and I think your dad did. We lived on candy bars, and the name of the candy bar was Ping, P-I-N-G, and a bottle of pop if we could get it, and that's how some of us survived.
Did you have to buy it?
Yes, yep, we did.
How much did a candy bar cost then?
Oh, next to nothing.
Yeah.
I don't think it cost much when I was discharged and got back home and saw them in a store. I don't think they were any more than 5-10 cents a piece anyway.
I guess you didn't have a whole lot of money though back
Didn't
then.
have much of anything. That's right.
So what do you recall? What was the pay at that time?
Gee, I don't remember. I know that upon discharge, we were making $60. Maybe you got $22. I think that's what a private
month.
got. Probably.
Yeah. Now you got on the Esperance Bay, and where did you land?
We landed in England, and I'm trying to think exactly where we pulled in, but yeah, we landed in England, and from there we were shipped to various staging areas, and eventually ended up in Crocombe, and then eventually went to Liscard. I forget exactly the name of the place.
Yeah.
Really.
And you were over there for a fair amount of time before heading over to France then, is that right?
That's right. And
So what did you do while you were in England then? What did they have you doing?
oh, while we were there, we did all kinds of things. We made camouflage nets for. We made camouflage nets, which was very, very important to cover buildings, machinery, tanks, and what have you. We practiced building bridges. We laid runways for the 82nd and 101st Airborne, and that was about it. We worked every day, even practicing and learning building Bailey Bridge or other bridge construction.
Yeah. At some point, my dad, and I know you were too, somehow involved with or attached to some glider units. Dad always talked about that.
We did. The 101st and 82nd Airborne was in Merrifield, England, where we were stationed, and we were in gliders often. the glider troops were there, and there were times when we went up and we didn't really know where we were going, but our first trip with a glider was very scary. It was like a matchbox cracking, and you thought that you were going to fall apart.
Was the thing made out of wood?
Yes, and some of them were made very, very close to Ironwood, Michigan, Malvern, Wisconsin.
Really?
They made the
Now, what pulled them up into the air? What
C-47s.
C-47s did?
They did.
And so, how many people could they fit into one of these gliders? What's that tripod?
The gliders that I was in were the American gliders. They weren't the big boxcar gliders that the English had, but I think you could fit 12, 13.
Oh, they
and
were
even
much
more than that.
Much larger than I assumed.
Well, sometimes they even used gliders to send equipment over later.
Yeah.
Large equipment in the glider.
Now, when they would take you up in the air and release that glider, what did you do? You sailed around a while and came back to the same
Well, they
airport?
had a glider pilot, and he knew what to do.
Yeah.
Some of them were very, very cagey, and some of them were excellent, and they did a lot of things they shouldn't, because in that particular area there were hedgerows, and they would hedge hop. They would come down and go up and down, and if you weren't afraid, you played the game with them and liked it very, very much.
So after the first time when it was real harrowing,
That's right.
Did it get to be fun for you?
Got used to it, and it was fun. Yes.
Do you think it ever got to be fun for Dad? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't remember him objecting to it. I think probably we even had an opportunity to look to see if we could find somebody who would take us up.
Yeah, he seemed to act like he enjoyed that, and Dad, I found that a little bit remarkable because he hated heights, but for some reason he looked back fondly at that time when you guys were in the gliders.
That's right. I'm the same way. I don't like heights either, even to this day. I'm very, very careful about that, but we enjoyed that. One thing we didn't know was that there were times if you were trackled up or what have you and put into the glider with a number of people and you had your packs on and everything, whether this was a real thing or not, whether you were going to go with that particular glider.
So was there much distinction made? Were you attached to the 82nd or the 101st, or you were just kind of all thrown in together at that point?
Yeah, we were. I would say they were attached to us probably at that time, because that particular area was guarded, because at that given time there were a lot of maps to be read by the paratroopers and the glider troops and what have you, to know what they were doing and what have you. And that whole area was guarded just in case there was somebody there to spy what was happening.
I see. How many people from your unit, were many of you from the 1306 were you pulled out into the gliders? I'm just curious as to how that worked out, how you and Dad ended up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I don't think there were that many at all.
Did they ask for volunteers, or did you?
Yeah, voluntarily, that's
Yeah.
what you did, yeah.
Okay, because I was always told in the military you don't volunteer for anything, but that sounds like
Yeah,
it
but
turned
that
out
type of-
okay, didn't it?
If you knew it was going to be fun, you did it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then it's my understanding that at the time of the invasion, some of those gliders actually had to take off and go in there behind the lines or whatever.
Oh, they did, and as a matter of fact, the posts and what have you in the various areas that they were to land were there, and many of them were killed immediately because they couldn't land the gliders at that particular time, and what have you. The glider troops took a very, very severe beating.
So was it just a matter of I guess luck at that point that you and he weren't chosen, or
That's right.
how did they decide who went and who didn't?
Well, those who went in particular were actual members who had trained to be glider infantry and what have you. And unless you were probably a specialist, a demolition specialist or what have you, there would be no fear of the engineers being taken up in gliders at that time, unless you were specifically a part of that unit.
I see. Okay. So, tell me about when you did finally ship out to the continent.
Well, 1306 Engineers was a part of the Third Army.
That was Patton's army, right?
Patton's Army, and they were to land at Utah Beach, and Utah Beach and Anzio Beach, or Omaha Beach, troops had landed there, and some of it was cleared and what have you. The 1306 Engineer job at that given time, once they landed on Utah Beach, was to clear roads, do whatever is necessary, and followed the Third Army infantrymen and artillery and what have you. And their job was primarily to maintain the roads, build the bridges, clear minefields, and that type of thing.
So that's one thing I didn't remember, but now I do recall Dad talking about. You guys actually had to go out and sweep minefields?
That's right, and I can remember your dad and myself being with a Corporal Stafford, especially in the Metz area, where he was on assignment and we as a group were with him, and he maintained, after a short period of time, there were no mines until he turned around, and yes it was, we were there in an area that was totally mined.
You were standing there?
We were standing, but fortunate for us, no one stepped on one, an S-mine they call them, otherwise they'd been blown up. Usually, from what I understood at that given time, the Germans at one time, their mines, except for mining heavy equipment and what have you, were to be used to either have the enemy step on it, blow off their leg or what have you, because once they became incapacitated, they themselves were no longer good as a soldier, and would take that many more to take care of them, so you would be diminishing
the force.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess it would. As hard as that sounds, it's better to wound somebody and take more people out of action than it would be to kill somebody. Yeah. Now, is that the guy you said there? You told me earlier that there was a guy that turned around and you could see 3 prongs.
That's
sticking.
right. That was Stafford.
Tell us a little bit more about that story.
Yes. I think for a person who was pretending to be so brave and to know that there was nothing there, to find out that, hey, listen, he could very well have been blown up, and the rest of us as well. Yes, he was shook.
Where was the mine? You said there was it like right next to
behind,
his foot?
because when he turned around with his hand, he almost put his hand on it.
Oh,
at
wow.
that time. Yeah.
And so, how did you, once you found these mines like that, what would you do to take them out?
Well, actually, there were a number of people in the outfit that knew exactly how to destroy those particular mines and what have you. I was not one of them.
So you had people trained to do
They
that.
were trained to, yes.
And they would actually go in and disarm that mine?
They knew
Or
exactly
would
what
they
to do.
blow
yes.
it up?
Or else they could have retreat and have somebody come in and blow up the whole field if at all possible.
Uh-huh. Now, did you take prisoners of war during any of this time?
Yes, we did. There were a number of times when we had prisoners of war, and many times they were utilized also to help construct roads where it was necessary, where we needed additional people. I can remember, I'm not quite sure, but I think that it was primarily in Valeroy, which was just out of Metz, where we took a number of German soldiers, and at that given time they looked younger than we were, and we were 18, 19 years old.
Yeah. So was the German army that depleted that they were taking kids?
At that point, they actually had taken the younger people into the service without any question.
Uh-huh. And so you had them out helping then?
Yes.
I'm assuming at gunpoint, or I guess though they would have been fairly cooperative though.
There wasn't. Those particular troops that were captured at that time were not SS troopers who were violent and would do anything to escape or what have you. These were common soldiers who, for the most part, were drafted and had to be in the army.
They were there just like
that's right.
You were, because they had to be. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, what sort of combat did your unit see?
Well, particularly artillery fire when bridges were being built and what have you. But in terms of the outfit being engaged in battle, not as you would in the infantry. Mm-hmm. No, you wouldn't. But you were very, very careful, but for mines, booby traps, and what have you, in terms of how difficult was it for an engineer, well, under the construction of roads or bridges in particular, the artillery was something that you feared, because you could very, very well be blown up by their ships.
So they were actually, at times, shooting at you with artillery?
Absolutely, yes.
Where so they were on the other side of the river or whatever, and could see you building a bridge, and they were trying to keep you from doing it?
Yeah. In Metz in particular, where they had their forts, Fort San Quentin and what have you, in an attempt to bridge that particular area, I can remember that they used smoke screens and what have you to protect the individuals who were building as a bridge at that particular time.
Bill, we were talking earlier about what your assignments were in the service, and one of the things that the 1306 is famous for is the bridge building.
That's right.
What types of bridges did you build?
We built Bailey bridges, pontoon bridges, and every other bridge that the engineers were asked to build. We built onto former bridges that were partially destroyed and added to them by Bailey bridges or whatever bridges were necessary. But our main our main object was to be sure that we provided the bridges that were necessary to move the troops on or to bring the supplies to the troops ahead of us. That was our main objective.
Well, I've always heard about Bailey bridges and read about them, but I've seen pictures of them, but I really don't know much about what they really were and how they were constructed. Can you fill out a little bit on that?
Every Bailey bridge had parts that had to be assembled together, and the engineers had to assemble these bridges. Once the steelwork or whatever was put in place, then the planking or whatever you call it had to be put in, and piece by piece was pushed and pushed across the river until we reached the other side to anchor them and then put them in place, and then the traffic was available there to carry the supplies or whatever was necessary. It was a quick operation.
So were the
very hard.
the spans made out of steel that was
Yes,
was
they
it
were.
partially prefabricated?
Yes, they were pre-done.
Was it then bolted together?
Yes, that's right.
How did you cantilever or extend these things out to over the river? I'm curious how you got from the bank hanging out over the river to start with.
That's right, and you had machinery to pull, as well as once the pieces were there, the expanses were pushed, say, I can't remember how many feet apart, but say 8-10 feet apart. Then you assembled again and what have you until you pushed them right over to the other side, and whatever was there to put the platform on, that was it.
What were they anchored to on the bank? I mean, how did you start the thing out from the bank? Well, did you have to sink some sort of a piling or a pier, or what did they hook onto to start?
That's what they had, was a piling or a pier, as you said, to start, and then eventually hook them on and continue to push them over to the other side.
Did you say it's called a polynor?
Piling.
Piling
is-
or pier.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
A piling or pier, and then you once you started running it, you just continued
That's
on
right.
over.
That's right.
And I'm assuming there was some sort of professionally trained engineer or
Well,
somebody to tell you
Yeah.
these
That-
spans did they go straight, or did they have to have a certain arc to them to handle the load?
Depending, but the majority of them were straight across, but if they had to, but we had engineers who were trained specifically in that outfit to be sure that they knew exactly what had to be done with the Bailey bridges or the other bridges, the pile bridges, where
Yeah.
you build piles, bridged like, say, took timbers and what have you up to a certain length, and then you piled across. And they knew exactly how much it could take. Usually they did, because they were very, very well trained for that particular.
So you would build these pilings up of heavy timbers, and they
Yes,
would
that's
be
right. Yep.
they would be brought in from elsewhere then.
Yes, that's right. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to think of where I can give you an example of one in the book that we had. But anyway, that was it in particular. Here you go. She's piling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is on page 142 of the Genie de Mon book. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'll train the camera on this picture later
That's
and
right.
include that.
You'll see exactly what we're talking
Very
about.
good. Back to your work. I know Dad said that occasionally, perhaps rarely, that you would see somebody of some significance, like some big shot colonel or general.
We did.
Who do you remember encountering along the way?
We did. When our job was to sand the roads in Luxembourg and in Belgium and what have you, at one given time, I can remember a Jeep coming through, and your dad and I were a part of the crew that were sanding, and we almost threw the sand in the face of General Marshall, who had been coming through.
Did you know who he was at the time?
No, we didn't at the time, but we were told that later.
Oh yeah.
That's right.
So you almost got in trouble.
That's
then,
right.
But not really.
I'm sure that as a general he would have understood, because after all, we were there to get the
Doing your
roads
job,
clear. Yeah.
Did you ever see Patton?
Yes, we did. We saw Patton, and before we went over to France, he delivered a lecture to us regarding the importance of being sure that the camouflage nets and what have you that we were doing were important, because they were to be covering the machinery, the tanks and what have you, so that they wouldn't necessarily be bombed. Yes, I remember him distinctly talking to us in a very firm, definite voice.
Yeah. Well, he definitely has that reputation.
That's right.
As having a presence about him, a certain personality. I guess it came in handy being the big general.
That's
though.
right.
Let's move on a little bit. What sort of campaign ribbons or medals did you earn during the war?
Well, the 1306 engineers certainly received the ribbons that were necessary for the European theater of operation, and the involvement in numerous areas where each individual received 5 stars on the European theater of operation ribbon. Later we moved on to the Philippine Islands and received a ribbon, and I'm not sure the exact name of it, but also for the liberation of the Philippines, and then later the South Pacific to Japan.
So it sounds like you marched all over the world then during that period of time.
That's right. As a matter of fact, once we left Austria, the 1306 engineers, we were headed for Marseille, and nobody knew that we were going to the Marseille area, hoping we were going to be going home. But once we got there, we didn't know particularly, but we got on a boat and we thought perhaps we'd be going home, and the first thing you know, we were on the General John Pope, on our way eventually to the Philippines by way of Panama. And I can remember stopping at Panama and they gave us 3 hours to leave the ship, and people came back with bananas and candy and what have you. It's the first time we ever saw a banana in years. And from there on in was off to the Philippine Islands. We didn't know that we were going there, but eventually we ended there. Spent time in the Philippine Islands, and I can remember this in particular. We were stationed in a little town, a little place called Colomba. And fortunately for us, in addition to the work that we had, there was a basketball court there, and we had a basketball team. And your dad and I and 7 others, 11 others, I think, belonged to, we had a basketball team, and we played the team that they had in Colomba, or others who came to play us. And that in itself was really, really something, because we enjoyed the idea of playing basketball.
It sounded like it would have been a great way to break up the monotony of what you had to do. What other types of things did you do to enjoy yourselves or to get away from the war?
In that particular area in Colomba, I can remember the first time we ever stopped there. It was the idea that for the first time we were able to eat some fresh fruit, bananas and pineapple. And I can very, very well remember going to a pineapple stand as we stopped the train, and over on the pineapple stand where everybody could see were heads of 2 Japanese that had been decapitated to show how important it was for the Philippines that they had done away with the Japanese.
These heads were mounted up on
Heads
stakes?
were there.
Yeah.
Didn't make any difference.
Wow.
We wanted that pineapple, and we got it.
Did you ever, I hate to say this, but did you ever, in any of your travels in Europe or Asia, sort of go in and raid the local stores, whether it be a wine cellar or any other kind of vendor?
When we were in Bernkastel, we were stationed there, and our barracks at that time had wine cellars of the best cognac, wine, and champagne. And for your dad and myself, who never did drink much, we did drink champagne, pink champagne, and did it taste so good. I'll never forget that. But
And again, what town was this in?
Ponta just a second. Bernkastel. Bernkastel. That was not too far from Trier. Years after that, my friend and I traced the same area that we had been in from the time we landed in Utah Beach all the way through, and we stopped and asked for pink champagne. There wasn't any, but they had very, very good wine yet, and we brought some of the wine back to the United States with us.
Well, since you mentioned that you traced your steps, can we sort of fly through then? You landed at Utah Beach, is that right?
That's right.
And then can you kind of go town by town or burg by burg?
Oh boy.
Where you went as best you recall?
Normandy, and all the way through, and then to Le Mans, and Fontainebleau, and from France on to Luxembourg and Belgium, and then to Bastogne, which was a bloody, bloody mess. When we reached Bastogne, there were evidence of hundreds of people who were killed and lined the streets. It was a mess at
You
that
mean just
particular
piled
time.
up bodies? That sort of thing? Bodies were
Bodies littered all over. Then from Bastogne, I'm trying to think, eventually, once we left Belgium and Luxembourg, on our way through Germany, Metz, and oh boy, a number of towns that I can't quickly remember, but if I had a book I could point them out to you. And then eventually ended up in Austria and in near the Alps and the Dolomites, in that particular area. Once we reached that particular area, there really wasn't much that had to be done because we were going to be shipped immediately out of there, not knowing where to go. But your dad and I were on an advance party with a Lieutenant Alden and another fellow by the name of Paul Milas, and we were to go to a destination where eventually the total company was to go. We reached there 4 days after they had arrived already. We were supposed to be the advance party, but once we got there, it was near Marseille, France. From that time in Marseille, rumors floated around that we probably would be going home. If we weren't, we probably would be going to somewhere in the Pacific. If not, we were going to go to the Panama Canal, and from there eventually to the Philippine Islands and Japan.
Let me ask you this. At what point were you in Nuremberg? Because I know Dad climbed up that big stadium and retrieved one of those large Nazi flags that Hitler used for propaganda films and such, and for his speeches. Dad ran up that stadium and got one of those. Do you recall when you were in Nuremberg?
I remember when we were in Nuremberg, and I remember your dad and some of the others climbing where Hitler had been giving all his particular speeches and what have you. And one of our friends who was a corporal got up and pretended he was Hitler speaking to the crowd and what have you. I don't remember the exact date, but I'm sure that you could find it in the book that you have.
Well, it sounds like you guys spent a lot of time marching, or perhaps some of the time you were riding.
That's right, a lot of time riding.
Now, at some point in time, I'm assuming it was winter time and all that, and that was reportedly one of the worst winters in European history.
In the Ardennes in particular.
So where were you during that winter? I'm assuming that would be the winter of '44.
That's right. That was in the Ardennes and what have you. And at that particular time, our assignment was to keep the roads clear. We even were sanding as much as possible, or whatever ashes there were, to keep the roads clear for the troops that were going on through. That was one of our missions. Later, we were housed in a beautiful, like a castle, which belonged at one time to somebody in Belgium, and stayed there for a period of time. But after that, and during that time, our assignments were to take care of the clearing of the roads for the troops to come through. Those definitions of that area are in that book that
I'll look that
you
up
have.
then.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the toll on you guys, I'm sure you felt pressure. Did you feel like you were under a whole lot of stress during that time, or were you fairly carefree for much of it? Or
No, I don't think we were ever carefree. The majority of the time, there was a mission to be accomplished, and you recognize that the time that you had to work or were given assignments were such that it could be 10 hours, could be 24 hours, whatever. A job had to be done, and you recognized that that was a part of being an engineer.
while in Europe, were you ever allowed to leave, like to go to the towns and visit with any of the locals?
Yes, we did. Every now and then, in a town called WWII. I wanted to talk to you about that. Your dad and I had met a family by the name of Devoti, D-E-V-O-T-I, and they had a son named Louis. And the reason we met them was that they had a little basketball court there, and we liked to have a little time to play basketball. And when we were there, this young kid played basketball very, very well. And so I asked him where he lived, and he told us, and he also said he was Italian. Because I could speak Italian, I found out where his mother and father lived. We visited there, and we found out that they had many, many difficulties. They had come from Italy and went to WWII. That night, your dad and I were able to get into the mess room, and we stole, a large container of what looked like Spam and a gallon of pineapple, and we took it over to that home. And the mother the next day had us over for what little spaghetti she had and made that meat a part of the spaghetti, and the dessert was pineapple.
Oh, wonderful.
I did write to that family often when I came back to the States and found out that the young man, whose name was Louis, became a part of the French either Olympic or basketball team.
Oh, yeah?
Yes,
So he was quite good then.
yeah.
Well, besides basketball, what did people do to entertain themselves?
I don't know what the people there did.
And what about soldiers?
Valeroy at one time was a prison of, the town had a prison of war camp for Russians whom the Germans brought in to work in the mines there. There was a mine there, and they worked in those mines. Except for the kids who had that opportunity, I guess, to play basketball or what have you, I think the people worked in the mines and did whatever was required of them.
What did you do to try to break the monotony besides basketball? Were there other things to do?
We did. Whenever there was reading, the Stars and Stripes,
Yeah.
or
How often did mail come?
or if we got some mail, or also often I read the mail to some of the people who were not capable of reading
Some of the
and helped
Ameri-
write some of the letters for them.
So some of the American soldiers were illiterate.
That's right, we're not capable of doing that.
And so you would actually compose letters for
That's
them.
right. And I think your dad did the same.
Were entertainers ever brought in?
Not there, but I can remember one time, and I don't know exactly where, they brought in entertainers. But when we reached Marseille, France, that area, I remember distinctly that Jascha Heifetz, a world-known violinist, came in to perform a concert. To follow him was, and I'll have to think in my mind who it was someone whom the troops really wanted to hear, and they were not polite enough to let Jascha Heifetz concentrate to play his concert. He got out 4 or 5 times and said, "Troops, unless you're quiet, I cannot perform." And believe it or not, they didn't, and he walked off the platform. The person to follow him was Bobby Breen and somebody else. I can't remember.
That was
who else.
a contemporary musician,
yes.
somebody that was more in tune.
Everybody was waiting for him.
So all you young guys wanted somebody that was doing
That's
popular
right.
music.
I would have enjoyed hearing Jascha Heifetz
Yeah.
because I like classical music very
Yeah.
much.
Even back then you did.
Yeah, even then I did.
Yeah. It's interesting though. A lot of 19, 20-year-olds couldn't care less.
Well, in my particular school and background, we had good classes in music appreciation and what have you, and I knew some of the opera singers, and it was nothing for me to remember Luritz Melchior and what have you, because our music department had those people.
I see.
Yes.
Do you remember anything humorous, particularly funny, that went on during the war?
There was always something humorous.
I guess you had some characters in your
Yeah,
unit.
we had some characters in the service.
Maybe it wasn't always real funny.
Well, it was funny. I can remember when we arrived in Yokohama, Japan, a Polish fella, and I'm not sure I can remember his name. I think his name was Whitey Kraslavic. Grabbed a white horse and mounted it and ran it down the street and back again and what have you, where everybody laughed because of the things he was doing. We had a 572nd transportation company attached to us. They were black, and they always provided something that was humorous for us. Either the way they sang, the whether they danced, or what have you. Coming from the north, not ever having seen a black man, that was always humorous for me.
Yeah. So, did anybody, well, I'm sure the answer to this is yes, but do you remember anybody pulling pranks on each other?
Oh yeah, there was always somebody pulling pranks on somebody, writing letters, pretending they came from their wives or what have you, and they hadn't, or indicating that they had received a phone call or a V-mail or something, indicating that so-and-so's girlfriend is going with somebody else, that type of thing. Basically, that was pretty much the thing that happened.
Something that wasn't so funny happened to my dad, and I don't know if you recall, but there was a mistake in communication, and he was led to believe that his dad had passed away. Do you recall that? And it turns out that it was a grandfather, and my dad actually thought from the communication that his father had passed away. So I can see where things can get kind of
Turned around.
get lost
Yeah.
because my dad didn't find out until later that his dad was still alive. So I guess the news the letters or whatever were filtered to a large degree. Is that right?
That's right.
By the military?
They were censored.
Okay. I mean, so when you would send a letter back to your mom, or your mom would send something back to you, was it very commonplace that they would censor?
Yes, it was very, you could tell very well where lines were drawn through certain statements that were being made that were sent out as opposed to those that came in. I remember one thing that I received a package from home, and only in part. My mother said she thought it was important for me to send a watch that I received for graduation. My parents are very poor, but I graduated from Wakefield High School, and I did quite well. I received the American Legion Award and what have you, and with that a number of people had pitched in and bought me a very nice watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what the name of that, what the make of that watch was, but the package arrived without the watch.
Oh.
And I felt very badly about that.
You think somebody had actually just stolen it? Who knows?
Could well have done that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what about some of the people in your unit? I'm sure you can remember some of them. Can you remember any names from your
Yep.
platoon?
3 people who were very humorous and people that you had to like. One was Leonard Swizik, and he was from Hamtramck, Michigan.
How would you spell his name, you think?
Oh boy. I don't think there's a vowel in that name.
How would you say it again?
Leonard Swizik.
Okay.
I think his real name probably was Swizinski.
Uh-huh.
And
So
then,
he was Polish?
Yeah, Polish. And the other one was George Robb, and there's a picture of him in the book that you
Yeah,
had.
I think you gave me a picture, a photograph that somebody took with him
Yes,
and you and my
he
dad
was
in
from
it.
Gregory, Michigan, and he was always humorous. He could always brighten up a day. And then there was Paul Milas and Felix Portuisi, who were from Chicago area. Paul Milas was always humorous until finally he got a Dear John letter.
Oh, no.
Yep, he was engaged to be married, and while he was gone, apparently his girlfriend found somebody else, and that was the end of his feeling that he was going to be married to her. Felix Pertwee had an excellent voice, and he could sing like Frank Sinatra, like you wouldn't believe. And people used to say, "Come on, Felix Pertwee, get up there and sing for us." Eugene Zienty was a Polish fellow from Chicago who was always very, very serious. Rude, I can't remember his first name, was Jewish, who eventually ended up in the kitchen as a cook. And he took nothing from people who said that his meals were not proper. And let's see who else. I'm trying to think.
Who is your squad leader?
The platoon leader was Skittone. His last name was Skittone, Skittone. The squad leader was Bill Nordstrom, who was, you could tell he was very intelligent and very humorous, very musical. He played the violin and was able to compose funny little songs as well as programs. I can remember, he put on, had us together and put on a little play. It was called I Love Mountain Music. Good old mountain music played by the Hillbilly Band. Let's see what else it was.
And this was
Give me
Skittone.
give me rhythm. Let me play like rhythm. I hear the music is very grand. I hear Hawaiians play in the land of Wiki Wacky. But by Jiminy, you can't beat the music by My Knee by Crocky. Anyway, I remember that.
It's pretty amazing what you do remember. I have to tell you. And it seems like it's just yesterday for you, huh?
It does.
Some things like that, it just starts coming back and flowing like that, huh?
I'll have to tell you this, that little skit and that little song, if I can go back and remember it again, when he was in the 8th grade, I had a group of boys and they had a talent show, and I had them dressed up and they played that particular song and did the gestures. He wasn't in it because he wouldn't do it.
I don't blame you, Don.
I can remember this. Now, Ezra, get your guitar fixed. Every time you play, you get your chords all mixed. Now, boys, be we in key. We got to get some pep in this orchestra. We're aiming to get the job on the radio soon, but if you don't do it, if you aren't in tune, we sure won't get it. Now, boys, let's play once more. That's what it was.
Well, at least there's not a foul word in all that.
No, it wasn't.
I'm assuming there probably were a few dirty ditties along the way too, huh? I never heard of soldiers that didn't do that. It sounded like you had a rather interesting mix of folks in your squad. So how large was a squad? You think?
I think I'm not sure. Say 15 soldiers.
Okay, and then a platoon roughly double that. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Triple that.
Oh, so you've got so you told me your squad leader was Nordstrom. Is that right?
No, squad leader, but the platoon leader was named Skittone.
And that was a platoon leader.
Nordstrom was our squad leader, and
all right,
we
and
liked
so
him.
what ranks were they?
Corporals and sergeants.
Okay.
Later became probably a staff sergeant.
Uh-huh. Who are your officers directly over you that you can remember?
Lieutenant Alden, Alden.
Uh-huh. So he was one of the company's officers?
That's right, one of the platoon sergeants.
Okay.
Lieutenants.
Okay. So how many officers can you remember in your company?
Oh boy. I remember within Company F we had 3.
Go
three
ahead.
or four. I think Lieutenant Alden, Petrovich, I think, and maybe McTaggart and Roy. I think maybe the other one was Roy.
Okay.
He came to us later.
All right. I think you recall the one that we talked about yesterday then very well.
Tall. Played on the basketball team
these-
with us.
It shows something like 5 of them right here. You said one of them joined you later.
I think McTaggart.
Okay, so he came in somewhat later. Did he replace?
No, Roy came in later, but McTaggart, I think, was promoted on the field.
Okay, so he was an online
Online,
kind
yeah.
advancement then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember him in particular when we went to the Philippine Islands. I had sent one of the watches I had out, and it came back, and it didn't work. And we were pressing the guy and to whom he sent it to find out if he had taken all the jewels out of it, which was I didn't know anything about.
You thought they were real jewels in there, valuable jewels.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that.
Who would you think were your closest buddies that you hung out with the most?
My closest buddy was Ocie Warner, and he was like a brother to me. And we did just about everything together. He came from a different part of the country, different from what I did, but his values, I think, were pretty much the same as mine. We later got together. I went to his hometown and his home and stayed with them. Then went on to California and did some work, and then he came back to Winfield, Louisiana, and I did to Wakefield, Michigan. And we had decided that we would go to school together. So he came up, and we went to school together for 2 years at Gogimick Junior College.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. What about any others? Did you have any other really close buddies?
Yeah, we had Rodney K. Peterson, who was from Alexandria, Minnesota. He was a very close friend of ours. And Lyle Mankey, who was from Flint, Michigan. And Al Lazat, who was not a close friend of ours, but he was a friend of ours. And we appreciated him, even though he was pretty much of a rounder. And let's see. I'm trying to think of Fitzgerald and Ira Barney and Bernhardt, who was in charge of a tool. You had a tool trailer where all the tools were placed and what have you. And that eventually, because Bernhardt loved choice liquors, when you went in there and instead of getting a shovel, you were able to get a beer or a glass of wine or whatever they had.
Well, he was sort of like radar on the man show. He could get you what you wanted, huh?
That's right.
So was there a fairly good undercurrent of trade in the military where you could barter for things you wanted?
You could, yes. And because neither your dad or I smoked, cigarettes were good for barter, and beer. You got X number of cans of beer. I can still remember one of the beers, I'd never heard of it before, it was called Fort Pitt. Fort Pitt. And those who wanted a can of beer were able to get it from us in particular.
So you would trade your beer
And
for
we'd
some
trade
other...
our beer, and sometimes we just give it to them.
Yeah. So what were the rations typically?
We got some cigarettes, and we got some beer when we were in the Philippine Islands in particular. Of course, the only things you got that were different were what you found in the K rations, or the 10-and-1 rations, or the sea rations. The sea rations were something that we really liked because you could get such as spaghetti and meatballs in one of the cans or whatever there was in there. Whereas in the K rations, you know full well, you got some cheese and some hard crackers and maybe some real hard bitter chocolate. But that's what you kept with you, perhaps for the most part, all the way through Europe.
So the K ration was sort of the staple,
That was a big thing. Yeah.
and then the C rations, were they given at special
Well, you could get
occasions,
to-
or just
yeah.
how did they decide?
They eventually got to us later, I remember, but they were in cans, and oh, by the way, I saved something for you.
Yeah.
I'll show it to you later. And you had to open the cans with your little opener, and
Yeah, I recall Dad's can opener. He had it at one point.
yeah, it wasn't a can opener, but it was like a can opener.
Yeah, it was kind of like that's
Did you
right.
Did you ever see one of
The,
those?
the one that I recall had a hinge on it. It seemed like, and a little blade on it.
Yeah,
Is that-
little blade. And whatever.
Yeah.
I saved one for you. It was
Oh
your
yeah.
dad's.
Well, I don't know where his is. It used to be attached to his dog tags, but it's not
Okay.
on him anymore.
Okay. And let's see.
So did
We
you
have-
ever get fresh food? Did they occasionally? They didn't cook for you, really, huh?
Never. Not that
Never.
I can remember.
And it seems like Dad told me he hated. Did you have something that was repulsive sounding, like powdered eggs? Or
Well, that's what they were in the K rations. They were eggs that were in a can, plus a small can of cheese.
yeah,
But powdered eggs, nobody cared for them.
yeah. He said they were terrible. Yeah.
But later I learned, and if your dad were alive, I'd be able to tell him. When I was a principal of a school, I was in charge of the hot lunch program, and we used to get surplus, a lot of powdered eggs. Well, what are you going to do with them? I didn't know until I found out. Somebody said, "You want to know what to do with them? You go to Escanaba, where the nuns are in charge of Holy Name, and you'll find out what to do." And so I did. We went there, and they showed us exactly what to do. You took the powdered eggs, and you added milk and whatever to them, and you baked them. And you ground them up like you normally would, and you put your mayonnaise and mustard and what have you, and you serve them on egg salad sandwiches, and the kids wouldn't know the difference.
Really.
And it was excellent.
If you'd only known. Of course, you probably didn't have any of those things to fix it up with over there in
No,
Europe.
not there
though,
you
huh?
didn't, no.
So you sort of ate wherever you could, is that right? Just by the side of the road or whatever?
That's right. The only time we ever had anything fresh was when we hit Normandy, and we were going through some of those places, and if you could stop for a while, the people had fresh eggs or what have you, and they gave them to you. They were so happy to be liberated. And they also made, if they had some fruit or what have you, I remember they made a little bit of a dessert of something like a pie, flat, but they didn't have a cover on it, and it had sliced plums or something on them. And that was the only thing I remember that we got that was fresh.
Well, you all had guns.
Yep.
Did anybody go out and shoot a deer or, God forbid, a cow or a pig or something?
Yeah, we all had M1s. And no, the only time I remember where there was a violation of any sort was that when we were in Austria, and I can't remember the town, but they had beautiful lakes and what have you, one of the fellows was going to be court-martialed because he threw a hand grenade in the lake and the fish came up.
Yeah.
And that's the only time I remember that anybody ever did anything that they shouldn't have for wildlife or what have you.
Well, so they had fairly tight restrictions on you guys then.
They did. They wanted, the officers were sure about that.
Yeah. Now, it sounds pretty horrible, and I hate to bring this up, but you told me that my dad actually had to witness some sort of court-martialed event. Is that right?
That's
One of
right.
the American soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know
Somebody
what?
was hanged.
An American soldier was hanged.
Yep, and I don't remember exactly where and what have you. He, because he was capable of carpentry and what have you, was going to be a part of a group that made the gallows.
My dad was?
Yeah, and he didn't. He was pulled out of that, but he was responsible for viewing the hanging.
My dad had to
Your
watch
dad
it.
had to view it.
I guess that's one way for the officers to hammer it into the troops to behave, huh?
Probably.
Wow, that would be tough to take. To be bad enough to be in war, but to
That's
see one
right.
of your own people hanged. I would only assumed that whatever the guy did was pretty bad.
Could have been, yeah.
Yeah. Did you keep any kind of a personal diary during the war?
I did. Yes, I had. It wasn't as elaborate as it might have been, because under the circumstances you couldn't keep them that well, but I did have some. I may have some material yet that I can forward to you. For instance, Arlon, Belgium, was the place when we first heard. Your dad and I were out in front of a building that President Roosevelt had died, and was a little kid who used to come every day to see us. We didn't have anything particular to do, but he would talk to us because he could speak some English and what have you. And then he came in to tell us that Roosevelt had died. I had a little bit of something in my diary about him, and I still remember his name. His name was Serge Prudhomme, Prudhomme.
Sound like a Frenchman.
Yes, he was. Another thing I remember in my diary was having been in Fontainebleau, which is a Champagne district of France, where your dad and I stopped, and the person, I can't remember the lady, invited us in, and as we entered her house, she was playing on the piano Stars and Stripes Forever. She had been an American who had come over to Fontainebleau. Apparently she was married to a Frenchman, I don't know. And at that time, whatever meal they had, we had a meal with them. Their son was a prisoner of war, I remember that as well. Let's see, what
And
else?
she was playing the piano for you.
She would play in the piano for us.
Wow. You said you had a diary. I know you took some photos. You gave me some of them, and you told me who some of the people were in them. I'm gonna go get some of these pictures and have you tell me who they are. I think some of them are listed on the back, but I'll have you, just for a matter of record, if you would go through some of these pictures that you gave me and mention some of the guys that are in them, and I'll put them on tape later.
Okay, standing, the person on the left was Alfred Lazat. And the next person I can't remember. Let's see. Oh, last name was Maine, and George Robb. George Robb was a comedian from the word go. Lazat was a fellow who was always looking for girls, no matter who they were. Willie Collins was from Arkansas. He was from Center Ridge, Arkansas.
Center Ridge, huh?
Let me tell you about Center Ridge. When Don and I were traveling down south, when Don and I were traveling in Arkansas, there was a big sign, and it said, "The Salad Bowl in Center Ridge, Arkansas." And I said to Don, we're going to go to that restaurant and find out where the hell that salad bowl is, because that's where Willie Collins came from.
Do you recall? I'll look that up. I'm fairly familiar with Arkansas, so I'm assuming that Center Ridge is not one of the largest places.
Do you remember that?
Walnut Ridge?
Oh, I know where Walnut Ridge is.
Maybe it was Walnut Ridge, but he was from Center Ridge. That's
Okay,
right.
I remember well where Walnut
And then
Ridge is.
behind Maine is Ocie Warner,
My dad. Okay.
your dad. He looked very, very happy and joyful in that particular. And the next one had to be, let's see. Oh. I don't think I spelled that right. I think it was Saturino. He was from New York. He was all right. He was more of the calmer people. The people from New York State who were in our service were bold and, for the most part, very ornery.
That's sort of the opinion that a lot of people have about New Yorkers in general, whether it's right or not. But,
San Jose, Costa
all
Rica.
right, you move on to the next picture if you got some more.
This
you
is
got some more of
Ocie.
that.
This is Ocie in the Jeep
Yeah.
with Lyle Mankey, who was from Flint, Michigan. And
The guy that's driving with the beer bottle in his hand.
and he came to visit us several times
Yeah.
here.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
I meant to ask you earlier, and we can get into that. Any of these people you've kept up with?
Yeah. And Maine and Lazat here, and Willie Collins there. We called Willie Collins a stump jumper. When we ever had to line up and do any type of drill, he was always out of step.
Yeah.
He was the one from Arkansas.
He was the guy, huh?
Yeah. And here's your dad and myself just sitting on this particular culvert, and I don't know for what reason, and I can't identify that guy up there, but it looks like it may have been Ira Barney, but I'm not sure. And here in this particular, these are most of the people from Eugene Zianti is from Chicago. He was a Polak from the word go. And Rodney Peterson from Alexandria, Minnesota. He was a very close friend of your dad's and mine. He's a good kid. I tried to look him up and I couldn't find him. He and I went to Alexandria, Minnesota one time, or through there.
Rodney Peterson.
Rodney K. Peterson.
Sounds like a good Scandinavian stock.
Yeah. When we landed in Washington and we're at Fort Lawton and Fort Lewis, he took us, your dad and took me, to some of his relatives in Washington for a day. I remember that. Let's see, who else do I see in here? And this is your dad and me. And I'm trying to think of where in the world we were at the time. Oh, in Verdun. Verdun. Your wife will pronounce Verdun like Verdun. And a very, very important city in France. As you enter Verdun, you'll see a huge entrance paying tribute to the soldiers of World War I.
Well, this is wonderful stuff. One thing, Bill, I noticed that you and my dad and everybody in that war talked about, this guy was a Polak, or this guy was an Italian guy, or this guy was a German guy, or this guy was a Jew, but the one thing that seemed to matter the most back then was you were Americans and you were fighting together. Nowadays we're so much more concerned about what ethnic group we're in, but it seems like back then, even though you made distinctions, you drew the line. You were Americans first.
That's right. There was, when you talk about a Polak, Eugene Zienty was a Polak, you knew Eugene Zienty was a Polak because all he talked about was pierogi and a number of things that the Poles had and what have you. Or if you talked about Felix Portuisi, who also was Italian and what have you, you remembered him because of the way he sang and what, but there were no problems in terms of getting along with one another. There wasn't. Willie Collins was a stump jumper.
Yeah.
But they liked Willie, even though he was out of step.
Well, and I've heard that many, many hundreds of thousands of people of German descent enlisted in the army and fought against the Germans without any question at all. And you are at least half Italian.
Yep.
And the Italians were theoretically our enemies, at least for a while.
Yes, they were.
And yet that wasn't a problem for you either.
It wasn't, and as close as we were, the 1306 engineers, had I had the opportunity, I could have been close to my relatives in the Tyrolean area where I visit now. No, there was no problem at all there.
Yeah.
Even when you had to deal with prisoners of war that were Germans, there wasn't that bitter feeling, because for the most part, the prisoners of war that we were dealing with were not SS troopers and what have you. They were young and what have you. I sensed by a number of the people who were in New Guinea and fought the Japanese, there was a completely different feeling there.
Yeah, I think I told you one of Dad's classmates at Winfield had been through the Bataan March, and it really poisoned my dad for a long time about Japanese. It was a totally different experience with prisoners of war there. I don't know how American prisoners of war were treated by Germans, but repeatedly they weren't treated well by the Japanese.
What I can remember, having been in Japan, was that once we got there, there was no problem. The war was over, and we were permitted to take the trucks out of the motor pool to go to Fujiyama or Tokyo or what have you. Because of the Japanese culture and what have you, there were never any problems.
Yeah.
They always bowed to you and
Yeah.
what have you.
Well, let's talk about how you then got from Europe to Japan, because Dad said that was an unpleasant ride as well. So did you leave out of Marseille?
Marseille, and the General John Pope, and I can't tell you the number of days.
Was that an American boat?
Yes, and a nice one,
Yeah.
very nice. But
Was it something that, was it originally a military ship, or was it retrofitted?
I think it was probably designed or converted at least for as a troop transport.
Uh-huh.
You had showers, you had your meals. I can still remember we never got accustomed to the fact that they served beans for breakfast. I can remember that.
This was run by U.S. Navy, though?
U.S. Navy, and when we went over, your dad and I as well, when we went over to England on His Majesty's transport, the Esperance Bay, we were sick. We really came over by rail. When you could get up on the deck, we were throwing up all the time, but not on General John Pope. It was clean, and we were able to get up on deck, but it was, I can't remember how many days. I think we qualified to be sailors, coming all the way from Marseille, France, all the way to the Philippine Islands.
It's kind of funny to me that you say they fed you beans for breakfast.
Yes.
That reminds me of an old ditty that I heard as a kid that was sung in some of the old military movies that were made, and it was one of them that went that the Navy gets the gravy and the Army gets the beans. So maybe you got the beans, huh?
Yeah, we did. We got the beans.
Well, so when you got on that boat, did they tell you where you were going?
No, we had no idea.
So they just told you to get on the boat.
You get on the ship, and that was it. We had no idea of where we were going. Some people thought we were going to New Guinea. Others thought there were rumors that fly all over. We didn't know a thing about it.
So it's pure speculation among the people.
And you know what? How surprised, to know that here we were in Panama.
So next thing you know, you're coming through the canal then.
Yes, we know. And we were able to have 3 hours at that time where people got out and came back with bananas and candy and what have you. Oh, God, it was really something. That was
you
beautiful.
were there for 3 whole days, and then
That's
back
right.
on the boat and
3 hours, I should say.
Oh, 3 hours.
3
you were there
hours.
for 3 hours.
Yeah, no
That
more
was your
than that.
only leave for the whole time you were there?
3 hours.
So from the time you left Marseille till you
Yep.
got to, the Philippines?
Yep.
You had 3 hours on land?
3 hours on land in Panama,
Uh-huh.
and that was it.
And so then you got back on the ship and,
Yep.
and you still didn't know where you were going?
No, and I think we stopped at the Marshall Islands and what have you, and then finally on our way to the Philippines, I guess before we got there we were told, but we couldn't get into Manila because of a storm, and we pulled into Subic Bay, and
The famous Subic Bay, huh?
and then eventually we were released and got on a train and went to, eventually we ended up in a place called Calamba.
Now, at some point along the way, I think Dad or somebody said Christmas came along. Do you remember where you were during the Christmas holiday? Because did they have some sort of a Christmas program there on the boat?
I don't remember. I remember the Christmas program on the way back from Japan.
Okay, that's the one you remember.
I remember
Okay. Do you recall then about how long it took you to get from Marseille to the Philippines?
that. Marseille to the Philippines.
Yeah.
Gee whiz. I have that written down somewhere, but
Was it a matter of a few weeks?
oh no, longer than that.
Longer than that. It was several months.
A month plus some.
Yeah, that's a long time to be on a boat if you're not a
It
sailor.
is, yeah.
Yeah. So then you went to the Philippines, and what did you do there?
Oh, I think we did a little bit of road work and what have you. Not much, because I think they had determined already once we got there that we were eventually going to Japan.
Now, but the war was still going at that point.
That's right. As a matter of fact, how bad. In my materials, I have pictures of General MacArthur signing the peace at Nicholas Field in the Philippine Islands to bring the war to an end. I don't have that, but yes, the war was still on. But not for long.
So they had you doing some sort of civil engineering type projects
That's
for
right.
sort of rebuilding projects.
Keep busy, and I think we may have built some barracks or something there. I remember we all had, for the first time, given mosquito nets
Yeah.
because of the possibility of malaria or what have you.
Were the mosquitoes bad?
I don't remember them being that bad, but I guess the bugs were bad.
I guess it was a climate change though for
Hot,
you.
oh, yeah. That's
Especially being a Youper and then
That's
spending
right.
all that time in
That's right.
Europe and then having to go to the Philippines. So you spent about how long were you in the Philippines?
I don't think we were in the Philippines any more than a month.
Okay, and then on to Japan.
Then on to Japan. And then Japan, for whatever time I can't remember, and there wasn't really much there to do. And as I told you, I still remember the name General Eichelberger, who did give the permission for the people at headquarters to give us an opportunity to see Japan as much as we could. And we went to Mount Fujiyama and some of those particular areas. I remember going to Tokyo, to the area where the emperor was situated, and I remember hearing a lecture of in Tokyo in particular of how they eventually treated the earthquakes because of the problem they had had in their construction of their buildings and what have you. And I also remember that the Japanese beer was not bad. We had Japanese beer. And it
Hey,
wasn't
that
bad.
matters. Things like that matter. Did you what did you care much for Japanese food?
No, because the only Japanese food you could have would be if you knew somebody, and I and your dad got to know a Japanese family who came down into our area for some reason. I don't know whether they were cleaning debris or what have you, and we had an invitation and we went to their home, and I can still remember sitting down on the floor and what have you, and they served us dried fish and dried peas, just like peanuts, and some tea. They didn't have much of anything, but they were very, very polite and what have you. After the war, I remember having had the address, and I had my kids in Don's class in the 8th grade write. And one of the girls in particular continued to write and received letters and received Japanese dolls and what have you in exchange for some of the things that we had in the States.
Oh, that's nice. Okay, well we're getting close here. Let me ask you this: do you remember the day your service ended? You remember being discharged?
Yeah, at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. I couldn't get out right away because I had to have some dental work done, and they thought it was important for me to have it done before I was released. So, I'll bet I was discharged in January
At 46?
of 46.
Yeah. Okay.
How about your dad?
I think it was right around the same time, but he was discharged in Texas. Yeah, I can look that up a little bit later. I've got the exact date, but it was a very similar time frame.
And I remember this, that I was discharged and took the train. The train actually from Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, came right up through Ironwood. Got off the train in Ironwood and caught a Greyhound bus, and you saw where we lived.
Yeah.
US 2, there was a bus stop there, and from there I had my barracks bag and what have you, and walked like that quarter of a mile or more, a half mile, up to our home. And could you believe, in January it was raining.
Wow.
It was raining cats and dogs.
Were your parents expecting you?
No, they never knew. When I knocked at the door, it was something. My mother couldn't believe it. Yeah.
Were your siblings home yet? Your others that were in the war?
My brother Joe, no, came out after. My brother Leo was in the war much longer after I was. No, he wasn't.
What did you do in those days and weeks after getting home when you first got back?
Nothing much more than visiting and going back to see teachers at school and what have you. A lot of the people whom I knew who were discharged found most of their time in the taverns.
Yeah. Well, what was different about your hometown after you got back, or what was different about anything when you got back?
I think probably the things that had changed more than anything else was Wakefield had one of the most beautiful community buildings that you could find anywhere. It had theaters, swimming pool, gymnasium, banquet halls.
And we're talking about a town what size?
At that time, maybe 6,000 people, 7,000.
That's pretty remarkable, considering it sounded like you had a really great amount of community pride or spirit.
Oh, well, they had such tremendous leaders at the time. And when I arrived, at that given time, what happened was that the city fathers, apparently after the war, determined that they weren't going to be able to provide janitors and the whole bit and what have you. And so the building was up for sale. Private owners could buy it. And they turned it into a restaurant and what have you. And eventually they lost it. And as we drove through Wakefield the other day to see the school where I was, they were tearing down.
Yeah, it's pretty sad to see.
Oh,
Bonnie and I drove through yesterday, and they've made a terrible amount of, shall we say, progress since we drove by a couple of days before. They're leveling that building fairly quickly. It's really sad because it's a beautiful old place.
Oh, it was gorgeous, and they could have converted that into housing where people could have had apartments looking across the lake and what have you. But since then, a graduate from Wakefield High School has contributed $3 million or $5 million to build another building there, because they discovered that the structural part of the building was no longer safe, which I don't believe was true, but nevertheless.
You see that all the time, Bill. They say that it costs too much to bring something back up to code, or they discover asbestos, or whatever the reason is. They tear these beautiful old places down and build something that's not going to last half as long.
And they don't do that in Europe anymore. My people and friends in Italy, the little town where I come from, if you looked at the outside of the building, it looks old, but if you went inside, it's something, right, Don?
400-year-old buildings are historical monuments, and they can do what they want inside, and a lot of them are state-of-the-art stainless steel and the rest of it. From the outside, they still look like a original building that had a hayloft over it, and you don't touch them.
Well, that's so nice to hear. I maybe we'll learn, but it's going to be too late for so much of it. Let me move on a little bit. When did you and Dad go to California? Was it how much later?
Maybe 3 weeks after we were discharged.
Oh, very quickly then.
Very quickly, yep. I came down to your grandma's and grandpa's place, and I don't think we spent any more than a week or maybe a little more, and we had determined, both of us, that we were going to find some place to work, and it would be California, and we lived with my sister.
So your sister had already settled there.
Oh yeah.
It was in Long Beach?
Yeah, my brother-in-law was an engineer in the Navy Yard, and he was also involved in the White Sands area at that time. So we moved in, and my sister had a room, and we lived there and found a job in Los Angeles, and worked for a guy named Jack Prestwood, and we were bricklayer helpers.
That sounds like a hard way to make a living.
It was, but it wasn't really that bad. Tossing bricks around and mixing mud and giving mud to the bricklayers and what have you.
Were you pretty good at it?
Good, and your dad had relatives in Bakersfield.
Yeah,
and
I've met them.
Did you?
Yeah, I did when I was young, and then Dad and Mom went over there a couple times and visited with them. I think some of them are still in that valley. The guy that settled there did very well for himself. He was in that early wave that went into farming there, and he had a huge amount of land. And of course, you know, in California, what that meant, he became fairly well off. But he's got a bunch of kids, and I don't know any of them anymore.
We visited there with your dad, and we also went to a wrestling match, a professional wrestling match, and I still remember this, that the guy who won the match got the microphone that was hanging down and hit the other guy on the head, and they said he knocked him out, and that was the end of the match. But anyway, your dad and I went to a wrestling match and also visited his relatives.
That's interesting. That's one of the tales that Dad tells, or used to tell over there about that time. He said that his cousin really liked wrestling, and Dad didn't, and Dad was convinced that it was all fake. And he said that sort of convinced him that it wasn't fake, because now he recalls when the guy hit the other guy with a microphone that looked like blood spurted out everywhere.
It did, yeah.
And whether that was real blood or ketchup, I don't know. But
I think that I got a hunch it was real blood.
But he said he thought it was real blood, and he thought the guy just bludgeoned the other guy, knocked him cold, and so he thought right then, well, maybe it's not all fake. So, but Dad never really developed a taste for wrestling. So, how long did you stay in California?
I think we stayed there until probably near the end of August.
So, and you got there when?
Well, let's see.
Maybe in the spring or?
Oh, I don't think we spent any more than a week, 2 weeks at your dad's place, and from there we went, and Mom's place, or your grandparents' place, and from there we took the bus and went to California. So, say, discharged in January sometime, and I think by February we were already in California.
Okay, so you spent several months there. Mm-hmm. So you told me the other night, how did you end up deciding bricklaying wasn't for you, and how did you leave?
Oh, we expected a raise, and we didn't get the raise we wanted, and we weren't particularly, we knew we weren't going to be there very long anyway, and so we thought we'd punish him. So when he came over, we told him, this is it. We'd like our paychecks and we're through. We're quitting. Well, we couldn't get our paychecks then, but we did. I think we waited for about 3 or 4 days and we finally got it. And I still remember the guy's name was Jack Presswood.
So he got back at you to some extent, huh?
That's right.
So what did you do when you first got back then to the UP? So you left California, and I take it you came back home. Is that right?
Yes, we did. We each found fellows who would advertise for riders. Your dad found one, and we found one, and he took us as close as he could. No, I think he took us right home. I don't know what he probably took your dad. Your dad probably found somebody that took him. We had to pay for gas and what have you, which was very, very cheap. And when I got home, I knew that it was I was going to go to school, so I made whatever arrangements that were necessary to prepare myself to go to school, as well as for your dad.
Now, was your education supported by the GI Bill?
Yes.
When did you know that they would help you to some extent? Did they tell you while you were in the service?
Yeah, you knew pretty well if you were a veteran that once you enrolled, the schools knew exactly what you qualified for, and that was it.
And to what extent did they help you? About how much a month did they give you?
I can't remember. You didn't pay for your tuition.
Okay, that's good.
And for the most part, you paid for, this was the funny part, they paid for your books and what have you, but if the professor demanded that you have an additional supplementary book, that was your responsibility. So what you did then was you shared with anybody else or somebody that had gone through and turned their book back in, and you could get it for $2.50 rather than $18 or whatever.
So you and Dad went to school up here. What's the name of the school?
Gogibic Community College.
And from reading about it, it's one of the oldest community colleges in the country.
That's
I was growing up with the same.
okay.
Kid each other about nationality.
What was it called back then?
Gogibic Junior College was called then, and you received a degree, and it indicated whether it be associate in arts or associate in sciences, and given at Arnold, Michigan, this 44th day of June in the year of our Lord, 1948.
Okay, so you went 2 years then, from 46 to 48. Very good.
Yes.
And you and Dad graduated in the same
Same
class.
class.
Yeah. So, and you both did I think his was an associate degree in the arts as well. Dad lived with your family those 2 years, right?
Yep.
And he told me so much about you and your mom. And he always told me that she was an Italian. You don't have an Italian name, but so can you briefly tell me about what your lineage is?
My mom is Italian.
First generation?
Yeah, and her the dialect that they speak in her town is called Nonis. It's a combination of Latin and Italian, and also because at one given time it belonged to Austria, some of the words are even part Austrian German. For instance, the real Italians would say, for instance, let's use a word.
Quetch. Quetch. Quetch.
Oh, a little. I want a little of spaghetti. C'è un poco de spaghetti. And in my dialect it would say Pwetch, which is part German and part Nonis.
And the word itself sounds a little more guttural.
It does, yeah. My father came from Slovenia, and my mother's first husband was killed in a mine with her father. They were both killed, one on a highway and one in the mine. And then my mother married my father, whose name was Ribic.
I've often wondered if the H wasn't an anglicized add-on.
It was add-on.
Yeah.
I have a sister who was born by my mother's first husband, and that name was Zadra, Z-A-D-R-A. And we have all kinds of Zadras who are relatives in Italy, and Macanis. We've never been able to find any relatives overseas in Slovenia. We attempted, but when we got there, that particular area was under Tito and was very, very difficult. And once we got to the little town and to the city hall, as they called it, the lady spoke very little, and we weren't able to find anything.
But you, on the other hand, you found quite a few of your Italian relatives.
Oh yes, we can tell you a lot about my family from my mother's side. My mother came from a family that was very well educated. There were bishops in the family. They had year-round passes, would you say, Don?
Yeah, tickets to the opera.
To the opera. And
Professor McConney was
Professor McConney was a professor at the University of Trento and taught the...
Dante.
What?
Dante.
Yeah,
Dante?
yes,
Oh,
Dante.
yeah.
And visited Vienna often,
And Verona, where the
and
opera
Verona, where the opera was. My father, I don't know, although my father wrote very well in his language. And I know he was bright because when he was getting his citizenship papers, he was better than I ever was in naming who in the hell the Supreme Court justices were and how many senators you had and the whole thing else. So, and he read in his own language as well as English.
He was more or less self-taught then, is that right, in English?
In English, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. But not only that, but because you worked in the mine, your partner may be Finnish, and maybe a month later he could be Italian or could be something else. My dad could speak Polish, he could speak Italian, he could speak Serbian, he could speak Croatian.
And you speak a number of languages, right?
Because of that, yeah. I don't know whether he told you or not, but when I started school, I was the only one who spoke English.
Really? But what other languages do you speak? What other languages do you speak?
I can speak Serbian, speak Croatian, I can speak the dialect of Italian, and I think probably if you gave me 3 or 4 weeks, I think I could converse in French too.
And that's pretty remarkable. And some of that comes from your dad then.
Yeah.
What language did you speak at the dinner table?
Well, I'll tell you, it's like everything else. A lot of people wanted to be sure that their children spoke English, and there wasn't much emphasis placed. But my mother and dad spoke Italian at the dinner table, and I could understand. We said our prayers at night in Italian, and nothing much in my dad's tongue, however.
Let's move on a little bit to the later years and wrap this up. Did you join any type of veterans organization? Is there anything like that around here?
Yeah, I was, when I first came out, the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars.
Do any of them still meet?
Oh yes, they still do.
Do you have reunions? Either with the people from your service or these people, veterans of World War II?
I've not established as such. I've met with people who were in the service with me before. They come up to visit me and what have you. I don't go to a VFW or an American Legion meeting anymore. I would imagine that if they call me for something that would be it, but I'm not, as a matter of fact, I dread the thought when I go to a funeral and they have the American Legion firing those goddamn shots. And I don't like that. I'm kind of determined that I wouldn't want that at my funeral too.
Yeah. Well, Bonnie's dad passed away this spring, and it was nice that an old vet came and played the taps.
Oh, they do that here too, and that is nice.
Yeah, it was
very nice. Yeah.
Even though comments were made about his abilities, but it was the thought was the nice part.
Yeah, and they present you with a flag.
Yeah.
And what have you.
So, what career did you choose after the war?
You'd be surprised to know that many of the subjects and what have you that I had when I first started school were leading toward medicine. And since my uncle, who was quite wealthy in Minnesota, could very well have provided me with an education beyond what I could have with the service, I transferred to teaching, and I could have a major in biology or zoology, and I had eugenics, I had genetics, I had vertebrate anatomy, the whole bit, transferred to the subjects that would give me a biology major. In addition to that, I chose an English major. So I had a major in English and a major in biology, a minor in math, and I don't know, a minor in psychology, and
He sounded like a real Renaissance type guy.
and a number, just a number of subjects and what have you.
And so you settled on teaching.
Settled on teaching, and was happy with it.
I'm glad. We need good teachers.
Yeah, I think I was a pretty good teacher, and I think I was a pretty good administrator. And I'll have to tell you this because he probably would tell you. Negotiations with a union is a very difficult thing, even in education. When the teachers are negotiating for whatever, salary and what have you, it became a difficult process.
Were you involved in that?
Unknown to anywhere else, probably. The teachers chose me, opposite of them, as an administrator, to negotiate their contract.
To mediate.
So I did that.
So you were the mediator on that sort of deal.
Yeah.
But between them and the school district.
And the administration, and I had to represent the administration. But
Well, they must have thought highly of you then. They must have thought that you could be at least impartial, if not an advocate for them.
Yeah, either that, they must have thought that I would.
Bring some reason to the whole mess.
No,
So-
I had a good experience as an administrator.
Now, before
as a
you were
teacher.
in the admin part of it, though, you were a teacher, right?
Yep.
And what did you teach?
I taught, I taught 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. I taught speech in the 8th grade. I taught English. I taught one high school algebra class because the guy died, and so I had certification K through 12. And the certification also included community college. And you have the same thing, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Don?
Yep.
Yep.
And so you taught everything.
Yep.
And then, at what point did you decide to go into administration, being a principal or whatever? Or were you just sort of nominated into the role?
After 3 years, they appointed me a principal of a K-8 school.
Oh, that's a very rapid rise then.
Yeah, 3 years.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was supervisor of all the elementary schools.
Now, where was this?
In now it's called West Iron County Township. It involves a city of Caspian, Stambo, Gastra,
Iron River.
yeah,
Iron River.
Iron River.
And what part of Michigan is that?
That's in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Okay.
From where you were in Ironwood, about 74 miles east of there.
Okay.
And
Is
from
it
there,
near Houghton?
no, that's Keweenaw Peninsula. That's the
Okay.
other way.
All right.
And then after that, we became administrators in Lower Michigan in the Ann Arbor area, down near the University of Michigan.
Uh-huh. Okay, and then finally settled back home.
And finally said, "To hell with it! I'm going back here and have it peaceful and sit out and watch the sunsets." And
Well, I must say, I can't imagine a more beautiful setting.
it is a good
You
setting.
really do have a
Yeah.
beautiful house, and what a view. That lake out there is just so serene. Those boulders out there with the water lapping at them.
It is, yeah.
Well, Bill, it's really been great. I appreciate this. You just don't know how much I appreciate hearing from my dad's old friend, and hearing some of these stories retold. Some of them I haven't heard in 40 years or more. So it's really been great. Is there anything you wanted to add about any of this? your war experience, anything.
No, not in particular. The thing that I would like to say is that I'm glad that your dad continued his education. I think he had come back here, he would have. He would have gone probably to Northern Michigan University and what have you, but he did well, and I'm pleased for that.
I must say that if he hadn't come here to start with, I don't think he would have.
I don't think he would have either. You know, he came with the idea of not having much confidence in himself to do it, but I think he found out after. He was very well accepted by all my friends and the other friends. He had made many friends here, that he could do it because he was a beaver for work. If it took till midnight and beyond midnight to get something, he did it, and I think that's why he succeeded.
Yeah.
I don't know, what school did he get his bachelor's degree from?
Dad went back to school first at a state school in Louisiana.
Okay.
He got married about that time, and so I'm not sure exactly how all this played out. I do know that Mom was pregnant with and then had my oldest brother Mike while Dad was finishing up his senior year of college at a small school called Northwestern State, which is in a beautiful little town of Natchitoches, Louisiana, which is the oldest town in the Louisiana Purchase.
Say it again.
It's Natchitoches. It's the French corollary of Nacogdoches. Well, there's a Nacogdoches, Texas, and a Natchitoches, Louisiana. They're on either side. The French and the Spanish were sort of vying. They're both named after the Natchitoches tribe of Indians. But anyway, the Louisiana town is Natchitoches.
Okay.
Now, all of that is 3 syllables, Natchitoches.
Natchitoches.
And that's where he went to college and got his bachelor's degree. And then Dad went to the University of Arkansas and got his master's. And then in a series of summers, he got his master's plus 30 there. And I think he was a dissertation short of a PhD, but for whatever reason, he never got around to doing that. He had 3 kids to tow around at that point, and mouths to feed. So he stopped there, but I think he was happy.
I'm sure.
So he taught a long time. He taught. I'm trying to remember when he became a principal. He became a principal about the time I graduated from high school. So in the early 70s, right around there.
Were you?
He had sense enough not to send us to the same school system.
Oh, I was going to ask that.
Yeah, we went to the one in Coshada, and he was at another school district called Hall Summit. And so he made sure of that. He didn't want us kidded or ostracized because we were the teacher's kid or whatever. It worked out fine. And then he was the principal up until retirement. And I think he very much enjoyed being a principal. So.
You, it isn't difficult for a person to recognize quickly what type of background in education a person had. Either you had an exceptional school background with teaching, or you as an individual, because of your parents, motivated you to do much more academically than others would. You had to have had an exceptionally good background, or somebody helping you to push you on. How did that go?
Probably a little bit of both, but also Dad, he always did stress with us how important it was to try to get an education. I think your generation, having gone through what you did, maybe you didn't know you were poor, but you struggled as kids, and Dad really didn't want us to have to do that. So he really hit me all the time about how important it was to keep the main thing, and to keep the goal in sight. So.
And you qualified academically so that you were accepted with scholarships or what have you at LSU then?
Well, I got fortunate. They came to me in high school.
Good. Yeah.
And then it made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Great.
So anyway.
I know your dad was very, very pleased with you because he wanted to emphasize with me on the telephone that you were a doctor.
Yeah. Well, he is proud. He was proud, and I'm proud that he was my dad. I'm really glad that you got him started in the right direction too, because I think he would have probably, not that it's a bad thing to do, but he would have probably ended up either being an auto mechanic like his father, or he would have gone into the oil industry, which is kind of rough for a guy his size.
That's right. Yeah.
He wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but being a roughneck up on top of one of those derricks was hard work. So anyway, he enjoyed. I think he was glad to have done what he did.
Good. Hey Don, are you anxious to serve pie?
I'm gonna
Only if they're anxious to eat
call it here. We're gonna call it here.